golf games on the PlayStation, believe it or not, there were quite a lot of them on the system, in fairness. And with it being a popular sport, it was inevitable that we were going to see a multitude of different titles that would range from the PGA outings, dating back even as early as 16-bit consoles and 8-bit consoles. I remember my first time ever really getting into playing a golf game would have been PGA Tour Golf for the Sega Master System. But later, we would get to play Sega World Tournament Golf, which would play from a top-down perspective. And in all honesty, it's one of my favourite golf games that I've ever played, and it's still as much fun today as it's ever been, really. While it hasn't aged as well, and yes, the controls can be quite fiddly, it's still a very good solid game. I'll always remember the fun that we used to have with family members, friends, even my dad would sit for hours playing through tournaments, trying to compete against each other, taking turns to see who could pull off the best shots and who could get the best and highest scores on the leaderboards. And while golf, I will admit, in my younger years wouldn't have been my preferred sport, because I was always more into soccer and obviously a little bit like Gaelic and hurling because I'm Irish, golf was one of those interesting sports that I wouldn't really get into as much until my later years as such. Now, I had plenty of friends around that were mad into golf, as their parents were avid golf players and they just knew the ins and outs of the sport, whereas I didn't really as such. It's only now in later years that I've literally grown a newfound respect for the overall sport, and with that interest it has also made me curious to try and maybe revisit some of these older games just to relive that nostalgia, because some of them are really, really good. One of them in question we have here is simply known as Actua Golf, which would be one of the earliest games in the Actua Sports series that would release on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, and would also see life on the PC in some shape or form. In more recent times, in the last few years, some of the games on the Actua Sports series can actually be found over on Steam, which I will leave a link to in the description if you want to go and check them out. If you don't have access to play them through emulation, this might be a good alternative. And Actua Golf itself would also be rebranded under Videography 97 in North America, and a version of the game was supposed to be ported later to the Nintendo 64 but was cancelled during its development. But regardless, the game got very good reception upon its release on all the consoles it found a home on, often being considered as one of the best games or golf games of its generation, in all fairness to it, and I can agree with that. Now, even going back to playing it, I remember myself getting a second hand copy of the game, and at the time, I will admit, it took me a while to get into it, because even at that stage I played golf games but I wasn't the biggest fan of them at the time. But the more I sat down and played it, the more I got into it, and again, I always found these games to be a lot more enjoyable if you're playing with friends or family members. The one thing I did find an issue with in this game is the long loading times. If anything, that's the only real main gripe of the game, because it had very nice graphics for its time. The visuals on the environments, the courses, in all honesty, were stunning. They really, really well, and it really captured the whole ambience and atmosphere of the sport in a very good way. Plus, it had the commentary from the legendary Peter Ellis, and he would jump in from time to time if you made a good shot, or more than likely, more often than not, if you made bad shots, which you genuinely would in this game.
Well, what can I say? When in doubt, say no. It's in the bunker. We'll certainly see sand fly here.
Because when you're playing, you have to time your button presses as the loading bar moves up and down. So you have to time where exactly to hit your marker so that you can get the most accurate shot. Sometimes it can be slower, sometimes it can be faster. Now, depending on the club that you're using, especially if you're using a driver, everything moves super quick. So it really is down to timing and pure luck. Now, if you do manage to pull it off, excellent. But more often than not, like myself, even now going back to play this, the amount of missed shots and mistakes I made is just crazy. But that's just all part of it, and it is all part of the fun.
Well, close, but not close enough. And it's in at last. Player 1 has finished this hole 1 over par.
Like, I have played later versions in the series with Actua Golf 2, which again is another excellent title. Even Actua Golf 3 is very, very good. But I don't know, I love the first game. I just think that it has a very distinctive and very unique charm to it, as it was different from a lot of other stuff out there. And even when we think about it, during the early months and years of the PlayStation, yes, there was a number of sports titles that were cropping up, but the Actua Sports series literally was dominating that whole field across not just the PlayStation, but even with the Sega Saturn. Yes, Sega also had their own sports series with the Sega Sports content, but the Actua Sports series was considered like as a comparison or a rival towards that, and it did do a good job in the early months and years of the PlayStation. Obviously over time it would be overshadowed when the likes of sports games and golf games became better. When you look at the likes of even EA Sports with the FIFA series, or from FIFA 98 Road to World Cup onwards, that literally set the standard. And then you had the ISS Pro series from Konami that were really just dominating in terms of soccer, and you had other golf games that were coming out, but I still genuinely think that the original Actua Golf and the future sequels are still among the best golf games that are on the PlayStation. They just have that interest and appeal, and for me, I feel that they're among some of the most authentic golf games out there. And like I said, the only thing that lets this game down in particular is just the loading times, as it is very long. But other than that, it is a very enjoyable experience. Like, even if I do go back further afield, when I did buy this game, now I did buy it second hand, and while I didn't play it for a while on the PlayStation itself, but I remember introducing it to my dad, and like, my dad has always been mad into like football, rugby, anything sport related, and he always did enjoy the golf. And even going back to, like I said earlier, with playing Sega World Tournament Golf on the Master System, and when we first got our PlayStation in Christmas of 1997, my dad deliberately went out and bought PGA Tour 96 just so that he could have a game to play, because he was like, why let the boys have all the fun? I need to have something for myself. And golf games were probably around his limit in terms of what he could cope with, because it was slow paced and he could get into it a lot more. There wasn't any confusing elements, and he wouldn't get overwhelmed by playing it. Like, if you're playing soccer games, especially back in those days, there's so many button combinations and presses. Like, for a casual or an average gamer or a beginner, it would throw you off very quickly, whereas these games were definitely more user friendly in terms of an overall beginner. So my dad would spend months playing PGA Tour 96, but then when I introduced Actua Golf to him, that was it. He completely moved away from PGA Tour 96 and went and played this instead, and he enjoyed this so much more, to a point that when myself and my brothers would come home from school, like I was at secondary school at the time, and dad would finish up work early, and where would he be? He'd be up in my room, sitting on my bed, playing the PlayStation, and we come in from school and we're like, can we get a go? And he's like, no, do you not have homework to do? So we're kind of like, right, that was you being told off and you didn't get near it. Once he was on it, that was it. But you're even years later, when the likes of Nintendo Wii came out, myself and my brother bunched together and bought my parents a Nintendo Wii, because we knew my dad liked the Wii Sports Golf that was on it, and so that was it. You didn't see him then for months. So I can see where I get my addiction from with games. Once he gets involved in it, that's it. But the one cool thing about Actua Golf is that, for me, I consider it like a timeless classic in a way, because it's one of those games that, yes, it is difficult to master, but it has a distinctive element and quality that you find yourself coming back to it every so often. I even find in recent years, I'll put it on an emulator, I'll even hook it up to, say, my laptop, and I'll play it on my TV in the living room, and my dad will come in and join in, and we'll both be playing a few games together, and we still do that every so often, and we still have great fun with it. Now, he'll be giving out about how slow it is, but he still will end up playing it. It's just one of those games you really just need to be patient with, that's all. But I genuinely think that it is a very, very solid and very good experience. Regardless of whether you played it on the PlayStation or the Sega Saturn, I still consider it to be one of the greatest golf games I've ever played. While we do have newer golf games with all of the distinctive elements, quirks, characteristics, control schemes, and all of the other intricate things, I find that more modern games aren't as easily approachable, and they can quickly become overwhelming. There's just something about the simplicity of these older games and the pick up and play value and appeal that just makes them more approachable in many respects. And for me, they're just as enjoyable, more so now than ever, because again, as I've gotten older, I've grown to share a newfound respect for these games. Now, I know that golf isn't for everybody. It's still not my number one sport, but I do enjoy sitting down watching it, because I love the whole atmosphere and the whole feeling around it. Like looking at the courses and the details of the structure and just the views that you get when you see the camera angles. You see how beautiful the course layouts are, and they're represented very, very well, and even in these older games. And I do like these slower kind of sports where you take your time, where you really have to think about what you're doing. That's why I even love watching the likes of snooker. I know it's a very different sport, but you have to think about everything, and there is a strategy behind everything that you do. Every choice that you make has an interaction and a consequence, and that's what makes it even more interesting. So like I said, I have gained a newfound respect for these sports and even for these older games. I still enjoy this. Yes, it's slow, it can be clunky at times, but give it time, be patient with it. You will have, from what I consider from my own perspective, one of the best golf experiences that you can have, even to the current day. And it's funny as well, because even though this was one of the earliest games in the Actua Sports series, this along with the PGA Tour series from EA also helped to set the standard moving forward for what golf games would later become. So this game does have a lot in terms of its history on the value that it provided overall. So that in itself is more than enough reason to go back and revisit it, or even just to experience it for the first time if you haven't done so already. It's still an enjoyable classic in all respects to it, it really is. I still go back to play it every so often, and I will go back to play it again in the future. But even so, I would love to know your thoughts of this interesting game, and what do you think of it overall? Are you a fan of the Actua Sports series in general, or did you enjoy the Actua Golf series of games? Or what did you think of them overall? So be sure to share it down in the comments below, and make sure to keep watching, as I will be covering more videos in the Actua Sports series that I will cover in future videos. But if you want to see any content that I have covered on previous videos within this series, you can check out this playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.